good place to start at the end of that wonderful marimba song. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to see all of your faces. My name is Betsy Moe, and I'm a program facilitator for SEDEPCA's Intercultural Encounters program and a mission co-worker in the Presbyterian Church USA. This is a really exciting night, but it's also an exciting time around SEDEPCA because we're starting to have groups come to Guatemala again. We just had 2 groups here last week, and they were both wonderful, wonderful experiences. As always, we want to help groups come and return with intention and thoughtfulness, which is why we are gathered tonight. As all of you know, we are going to talk tonight about mission, and we've invited 2 very special guests, Hunter Farrell and Bala Kellep, to share about their new book, Freeing Congregational Mission, A Practical Vision for Companionship, Cultural Humility, and Co-Development. We think that this book can play a transformative role in the way that individuals and congregations think about mission, whether you're participating in God's mission in your local community or across borders. And I can say that I wish I had this book 20 years ago when I started leading mission trips and in local mission engagement as a pastor for youth and later a pastor for all ages. So if you have not read the book yet, do not worry. No one is going to be putting you on the spot tonight, but I'm sure you're going to want to read it after hearing this presentation. Our time together is going to last about 1 hour and 15 minutes. Of course, if you need to leave, feel free to slip out at any time. And if you have questions along the way, write them in the chat directed at everyone, and our presenters will do their best to answer them at the end. So we're going to let them have uninterrupted time for the presentation, and then we'll take all the questions at the end. Remember to mute yourself, or if we need to, we'll mute you. But feel free to leave your camera on or turn it off. It's up to you. But without further ado, I'm going to hand the time over to Hunter and Bala.
Well, thanks so much, Betsy, and to our friends from SEDEPCA. We really appreciate this opportunity to be with you. I think I got back from Guatemala 24 hours ago. So I've really enjoyed the chance to be there and to meet so many of the folks at SEDEPCA. Really grateful for this opportunity, and just want to give a quick shout out to each of you who's here tonight. We recognize you as mission leaders. It may be at a congregational level, it may be in a your youth group, working with your deacons to do local outreach. It may be in ways that you engage in your mission committee to work for both local and global mission. But we appreciate the wisdom in this circle, and we're not unaware of all the experiences that you bring. And Bala and my research has shown us that congregational mission leaders are hungry to share with each other. So we'll have some moments here, some times where we can circle the wagons, if you will, and get together and talk in groups of 3. And we hope that that'll be helpful for you as you share some impressions and some experiences. So we're grateful tonight. Bala Kellep and I wrote this book, Freeing Congregational Mission, A Practical Vision for Companionship, Cultural Humility, and Co-Development. Because we thought, as we looked and talked to about 1,200 different mission leaders, some questions came to our mind. Yeah, Bala, let's go to that first slide. Talking with a Peruvian mother whose 2 daughters, were enrolled in a child sponsorship program. She asked me this question when I asked her what were some of the challenges about the program. She had extolled the virtues of it. And she said, "Hermano, brother, would you want a foreign adult writing regularly to your 7-year-old daughter?" And I was struck. Of course not. My daughter was about 7 or 8 at that point anyway. I said, over my dead body, would I allow a foreign stranger to be writing my kid? But I never thought about that when it came to this woman and the responsibility that God entrusted her with for her own children. And so are there ways that, whether it's child sponsorship or the different programs that we'll talk about tonight, are there ways that we could include her in God's plan for her child? It seems almost crazy to ask that question, but I think it's an important one to ask, and we'll look more deeply at that. Okay, well, the kinds of questions that came to us as we did our research, talking with 1,200 people, a lot like you, Roman Catholic, evangelical, and mainline Protestant mission leaders of local congregations. And we ask ourselves questions like this: does our fascination with the needy child keep us from seeing the child's parents, their extended family, and their community? Why do we almost always exclusively focus on poverty's symptoms rather than its causes? I feel good when I'm able to do something concrete in a finite and conclusive way. And yet all of us know, even in our own families, that life's not that simple. But our mission trips, our mission grants and foci really are laser targeted at looking at the symptoms rather than the causes of poverty. Well, again, a big shift in our world and in the world of mission for the U.S. church primarily is this change in the decision makers. If we were writing this book 50 years ago, we would have directed it towards Roman Catholic missionary order superiors. We would have written it to missionary organizations and mainline denominational mission groups, mission organizations. But those aren't the people making the decisions today for the billions of dollars that the U.S. church puts into mission each year. So we want to think about those for people. First, a shout out. We give thanks to God that God is doing a work. This is a work of the Holy Spirit. It's no longer the bureaucracy or the execs who are doing this, the elites. Rather, it's every Christian sees themselves as a missionary in certain ways, and we need to nuance that a bit. But we're thankful for that movement. At the same time, we find ourselves not only reinventing the wheel, not communicating with each other, not coordinating our work, but also falling into some rather dangerous traps, I'd say, some ruts that have been there long before we got to the rodeo, and that's the ruts of colonialism. We want to think about that with you tonight. So this research that Bal and I did touched on the experiences of 1,200 Protestant, Catholic, and evangelical parish mission leaders. Well, from that research, we asked them the question, what are you giving your money to? What is it that you support? And as we did that, we found 4 of the most popular mission strategies are these, and we were a bit surprised. Orphanages is a major mission activity for many U.S. congregations. This, despite the fact that we don't build orphanages in the global north anymore. We haven't for about 30, 40 years. And most children, like 95% plus of children who were originally placed in orphanages, have been moved out of orphanages because, simply speaking, child development experts know that children do not thrive in institutions. And yet, U.S. Christian mission dollars have created of orphanages a growing industry. And we see an increase, a sharp increase in the number of orphanages and the number of children who are kept in orphanages in the Dominican Republic, in Morocco, in places like Mexico and other Latin American countries. Well, this is a concern to us, and we ask ourselves the question why, and we'll get to that as we open this up. Our second big category of mission expenditures comes from mission trips that all of us participate in, but it's grown to become an almost $5 billion a year industry. This is the money that we put into not only the airfare, but also the travel, the expenses that arise from that. And we have to ask ourselves, who are these mission trips for? Increasingly, U.S. Christians describe the primary beneficiary of our mission trips as us. It's our youth. It's getting people excited about mission. It's showing them what their dollars are doing. But this is a high cost for our global partners and our local partners to pay if one of our primary expenses is to get us to be able to see them. So we just want to raise some questions. And I think Sedepka's framing of these as trips where you're looking to build a partnership, build a sense of companionship is an important focus of that. Okay. The third area of activity that we felt was important was thinking about child sponsorship. It's about a $4 billion a year industry among U.S. Christians. This, despite the gross inefficiencies, to put it nicely. Child sponsorship can spend more than half of the money that's received, can spend more than half of that in the US. They're not even sending that overseas in many cases. That's not the case for all child sponsorship programs, all these agencies. But it's the amount of money they have to spend on for me as a child sponsor to get my letters, to translate my letters, to deliver packages when I send them, et cetera. It's a significant amount of money and staff for the national organization. And so for a culture that really prizes, that we really values efficiency, we just ask ourselves the question, why is it that we're putting up with this inefficiency as a strategy to care for children? This not to mention the unintended negative outcomes and the fact that even folks who are wildly appreciative of child sponsorship programs recognize that there's been scant objective evaluation. Very few people are asking the question, how does this impact not only the sponsored kids in a family, but the unsponsored kids in a family? What does it mean in a family that's been raised in a sense of solidarity for the youngest child to simply not be sponsored and not have a hope of being sponsored because the standard 4 children in the family quota has already been met? We need to ask these questions and even ask the questions for children in the same community, but who are not sponsored. What are the messages that a young child is getting about their lack of, is it a lack of ability to be sponsored or a lack of goodness to be sponsored? These are messages that many kids are getting. Okay, and the final area that we wanted to mention is what a lot of people call meal packaging programs. And I'll be quite frank, if you want to get young people together, if you want to get a crowd together for a mission activity, well, you do a meal packaging program. The challenge with these programs, and you package rice or beans or some dried vegetables sometimes, and make nutritious meals, which can, in a disaster situation, save a life. And so, again, for all of these mission strategies, we say, praise God for people who are concerned and want to do something to help. That's a great thing. What we'd like to do is raise some questions about the ways that we're spending our money, the money that God has provided us with, as we share in this way. So meal packaging programs serve as an inoculator. They inoculate particularly young people against doing anything about global hunger. They don't focus on the causes of hunger. Rather, they say, you package these meals and you get a sense that, well, I've done something for hungry children in Haiti, and that's a good thing. But young people's activities after that don't show any interest or enthusiasm or any probability that they'll engage in hunger activities or concerns about hunger after that time. So that raises some questions for us as well. So these are the 4 areas of activity that U.S. congregations are putting most of their money in. Okay. All right, if we could move on. The question that comes to us then is, why do we as U.S. Christians who so highly value efficiency routinely invest in highly inefficient programs whose impacts have not been studied? That just seems, if someone was doing that for my kids, but wasn't studying the impact on my kids, and it was a long way around the block to get to help my kids, I would ask, tell me about this love for my children. And are there ways that you can include me as parents in our struggle to raise our kids right and do what God has, the responsibility that God has given us? So these are the questions, and these are harsh questions. And when we ask your pardon for this, at the same time, we feel like we've got a responsibility, as all of us do, to think deeply and critically about these issues, because a lot of us put a lot of our time and money and concern and prayer into God's mission. As we studied this, the 2 areas of challenge to you mission leaders as you struggle to lead U.S. Christians into more faithful and effective ways of engaging in God's mission, we feel like you've got 2 major barriers, and we wanted to describe them for you and then get some of your feedback. I'm going to ask you the question in a bit. Have you seen these tendencies, these barriers in your work, in your experience? And so I'll turn to that in a minute, and Nancy's going to help us by breaking us into some small groups briefly. But the first challenge is this. We call it selfie mission, and it's where, different from our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, which had a different understanding of their participation in mission, this is where personal transformation has become, has supplanted service to neighbor as mission's primary purpose. All of us have taken a mission selfie. I did one last week in Guatemala. You take a picture with your friends smiling behind you. The dangerous thing about a selfie is we can posit ourselves as benefactors of a broken and hungry world, a sea of need behind us. And so as we begin to think of ourselves in those ways, and we reproduce those images into Facebook space and Twitter and Instagram, et cetera, our conviction is that increasingly U.S. congregations are asking the question, will support this particular cause if it helps our congregation, if it'll rally people together, if we can find it easier to generate support for it. But we don't always go to those places where Presbyterians a century and a half went, to the places that were hardest to get to the most remote, the places with greatest need, et cetera. So we just raise this as a question. We sense this has been a shift over time. That's the first of the twin crises of mission. The second is one we've talked about, I think, increasingly over the last 2 years, and that is what we call this unexamined colonial legacy of mission. Well, what is that? Well, we consistently frame ourselves as people who are trying to help. We're well-intentioned communities with an obligation to solve the problems of the poor. And we talk about this in some of the coursework that we do at Pittsburgh Seminary. And you'll find it in the book, Freeing Congregational Mission. But I tried to tell a lot of stories about ways that we, in a sense, upstage God. We push ourselves into the center and push God to the side, and the mission becomes more about us. And that comes to us a bit from our colonial legacy. All of us have received these colonial, in our backpack, if you will. It's like we're carrying this script, and every once in a while we were carrying it, but we're not aware of all the things that we carry in our backpack. Well, this colonial legacy leads us to believe that we people, particularly white folks, particularly US folks, are able to solve the problems of the poor. And we see this a lot in international development circles, where wealthier countries suggest that they have the solution for poor countries. And if poor countries would just line up with US and other European nation foreign policy and economic policy, their economies would get ironed out and things would improve economically. We need to challenge this legacy and think about it, because it's built on the backs of that European colonial logic, which basically said that Europeans know what is best for people of color out in the world. And we feel that as we put this book together, we saw time and time again how U.S. congregational mission practices are strongly influenced by these colonial tapes, if you will. What I'd like us to do is touch base with you just for a moment. We'll take about 6 or 8 minutes. And I'd like to ask you this question. Could you give an example of selfie mission or colonial mission that maybe you've observed, either in your own community or stories that you've read, or in your own congregation, or even in your own mission practice? What did these look like? Just maybe tell a quick story. The instructions I'd like to give you are these. I'd encourage you, we'll break into groups, and Nancy will break us into groups in just a second. But I invite you to introduce yourself, and then using your first name, just go in alphabetical order. And each one of you take a couple minutes to share. You'll have about 8 minutes in this breakout group. Nancy, would you care to divide us into our small groups, and then we'll come back together in 8 minutes?
Sure. I'm opening all rooms now.
Welcome back, friends. Hope the conversations were helpful to you as we begin to identify some of these tendencies. One, the selfie mission tendency, which particularly in younger generations, but all of us are a part of it, has pushed God's mission to the side and allowed us to think more about what our congregation needs, what are our needs, to a challenging level. And then secondly, what we call those colonial assumptions of mission, where we assume that the European or the Euro-American or the white guy knows what's best for the missionized people. And I'm putting that in crude terms to make the point. But these are important questions to ask ourselves. And we found that many congregational mission leaders like yourselves across the board, Roman Catholic, Evangelical, and mainline Protestant, are struggling, trying to help their congregations move beyond these colonial assumptions about mission and this selfie mission. Okay, let's go on then to the next slide. One thing, as we begin to develop this kind of a theological, an anthropological, and a development understanding of mission, we use the image of the three-stone fire that's common in many places in across the world. Particularly in rural areas where people use three stones and they're able to build the fire underneath and cook the meal that feeds the family and beyond, often visitors and others of the community. The first stone is theological. We thought about a theology of companionship. And when we think about companionship, I was raised in the Presbyterian Church, and it was the Presbyterian Church's way of mission that drew me into the church. When we think about that, partnership has been kind of the centerpiece of Presbyterian mission, and I think that's a beautiful term. I think there are some challenges as we translate literally and figuratively that concept of partnership into other languages and cultures, because it can give the impression that we're partners as long as our needs are mutual, as long as we can move in the same direction. But once your desire and direction goes in a different direction, and I'm not going to go in that direction, then we say, okay, our partnership's over, the relationship's over. We're only together as we work on these particular tasks together. And we wanted to shift more towards, there's a Latin American understanding that SEDEPCA has been deeply involved in, what they talk about as compañerismo, a sense of companionship, that breaking of bread from the Latin roots of companion, with bread. It's the people that you share bread with. And that leads us right into the ministry of Jesus Christ. It reminds us of those many scenes in the gospel where we see Jesus not working a list, not fulfilling needs, but rather being with people, with spending time with them. And more often than not, even though he knows good and well what the person needs, he asks them. What an empowering move. He kind of shifts the floor and puts the mic in their hand, and they're given voice, they're given power. And so when he asks the crippled man, what does he want? Does he want to be made well? You scratch your head and you say, what's that about? But what a beautiful granting of personhood, an acknowledgement of personhood that Jesus is engaged in. So there's a level of, I would call, vulnerability in this companionship relationship. It's that we get to know each other so well that we can see each other's faults, right? We don't see, Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden having lunch together, right? They don't eat together. That's a space of a lot of vulnerability. And if Biden were to get, some spinach caught between his teeth, it's awkward, diplomatic faux pas, it's in all the papers, et cetera, right? And so they don't do that. They simply, they meet, they shake hands. It's very cold and formal. They never face away from the camera. It's a power position. Companionship is very different. We actually sit at table with friends, with people who are different from us, people who may surprise us. The conversation may go in unexpected ways. And that is, we believe, a movement of the Spirit. And we think that's really important for us to encounter, and serves as an important base for our missiology, or our way of engaging in mission. The second stone, we thought more in terms of the cultural anthropology, and we said the second stone needs to be about cultural humility. Almost a majority of our local mission leaders maintained that it was really important to them to develop greater cultural proficiency in their congregations, because they realize they're missing a lot of messages. They're missing a lot of clues from partners. About 5 minutes in the conversation, they look back and say, uh-oh, I think I'm reading this wrong. I don't think I really know what's going on in the room. And there's kind of a holy awkwardness, we would say, in that space, where we recognize that we don't know all that's in the room. And so we have to become very humble in our approach to that space. And so we talk about cultural humility in the book as being a second characteristic, along with this theology of companionship. These images that you're seeing come to us from, the first was from Spain. This one is from northern Cameroon, and are scenes from the life of Christ, but seen through the eyes of other cultures and peoples. The third stone, and this the final stone that we developed, we call co-development. And I've worked in development for 30 years with the Presbyterian Church in different countries of the world, and deeply appreciate our church's approach to development. We wanted to take a step further, though, take development a step further and think about co-development. And it's the simple recognition that I don't know if this happened to you in your relationship with your significant other, partner, spouse, but I think when Ruth and I got married, both of us anticipated, it was implicit, we never talked about it, but subconsciously, we had a plan to develop our spouse. Right? That never happened to you all. You didn't do that, did you? Well, I was going to kind of help her become a better person, the person God had created her to be. And she had the same plan for me. Well, needless to say, both those plans failed miserably because I'm the only one who can develop me, and she's the only one who can develop herself. So by God's grace, both of us can be helpful in each other's development. We can bring tools, we can take away barriers. But ultimately, because a person is created in the image of God, they're the primary person whose hand needs to draw their destiny, right? To draw the picture of their destiny. So we make a strong emphasis on these, what we call these assumptions regarding co-development. Okay, well, these are the things we wanted to share with you in terms of some of the big ideas in the book. Bala, let's move on to the next slide if we could. And the second half of the book, after lifting up some of these ideas, just looks at the stories of mission leaders across the country, Catholic, Evangelical, and mainline Protestant, who are, we would say, innovators, who are leading their congregations in some particularly powerful ways, using questions, for example, by taking their mission committee out into a community mission experience, and then coming back to the church and doing some reflection, finding that that can be one of the most powerful ways to get a mission committee out of the committee rut and into feeling like that they're a mission movement leading the church forward in God's mission. These are some of the things that we talk about then in our book, Freeing Congregational Mission. Bala did a beautiful job of developing 7 tools for congregational mission leaders like yourself, and he's going to talk a bit about those.
So, yeah, thank you, Hunter. With the 7 tools, basically, these are the tools that, through the conversation with the congregational mission leaders, there's a strong, or there's a sense of need for some kind of tool, how to engage across culture, or how to do mission in an effective way, especially as we talk into development, or whether we talk about short-term mission trips. So the first tool that I'm going to be talking with you and go through with you a little bit this evening is tool number 1, what's in a picture, guidelines for representing others through photography. So the thing is, like, especially as Hunter mentioned, we live in a world of selfie, right? Or because we have a cell phone with us, we have in our pocket, wherever we go, we take picture and immediately we share on social media. So the problem with that is oftentimes we don't really think through we didn't really think through why do we take a picture, and let alone share the image. So we're going to look into just like 3 principle or 3 guidance that we share on the book, and we'll look into some of the images and look and do some exercise on this tool. So the first one is whenever we take a picture, the position of the camera, or the angle where we take the picture, right? So oftentimes this is one of the things that we don't really think through. But for those of you who are into photography, or you learn photography, the composition or the angle of the image is very important. It conveys a strong message, whether it's positive or negative. It has on that. So the question, does the composition or angle of this photo disempower or marginalize the subject, or even empower the subject, right? The second one is the substitution. substitution basically asks a question: will I let my child to be portrayed this way, or will I let my community to be portrayed or seen this way? Because oftentimes we just take a picture because it especially as we through the conversation or through research, we found that oftentimes, for example, some of these organizations that sponsor children or that work for children mainly portray a sad looking child because that helped their sponsor. So in some way it's really dehumanized, because I believe most of us, we want to let our children to be seen or take a picture of our children dirty and share on social media, let alone. So yeah, those are the questions that we oftentimes forget to ask. The last one is the power. Who is the doer? Who is the person who is the doer in the image? Because from that image, whoever we portrayed as doer, that has the power over the person. So how does the image reinforce comfortable colonial and racist stereotypes? Because oftentimes, of course, these are kind of image that we like to take, because when we go on a short-term mission trip, we want to take a picture that shows that we do something while we out in the field. So in some way, of course, there is that intention or that pressure, but at the same time, this can portray in a negative way, especially for the people that we engage and work with. So what I'm going to mean, of course, there are other guidance if you look on the book, on the tool, but for now I just share those three things, and then I'm going to share some of the images, and I invite you all to take a look at the image and share what you see by looking on that image. So I will appreciate your, you can unmute and share what you see on the image.
Bala, I was wondering, would it be helpful if folks put in the chat so we could hear from more people? If folks just type into the chat what they see in the image?
Oh yeah. So I will someone read the chat then, or let me see here if I can pull the chat. Okay. Yeah, maybe I can see them. Oh no. All right. Oops. That. All right. What do you see this image? You're welcome to type and on the chat. We'll take a few. White man taking care of a sad person of color, anger, a dirty child, sadness, dirty child, a beautiful boy, a boy all alone. Where are his parents? Our uncle position dirty. So yeah, I mean, those are the yeah, intense eyes. Yeah, so those, yeah, thank you for all the being looked down upon or pleading. So it's kind of, it portrayed those are the meaning when we look at this image. Like it just we ask a question, where is he? Is he outside his house, or is he somewhere in refugee camp, or where are his parents? So it's difficult to tell, and it's really looking sad and also tense or nervous. Yeah, good for asking for money. Yeah, thank you. I'll move into the next slide here, the next image. What do you see in this image? Walking together. Again, what do you see in this image? Yeah, hard workers, good community, strong sense of community we can see there. it also shows that, yeah, working hard, they are the doer there, a woman only walking toward a common goal. Yeah, I don't see any faces. Yeah, we don't see their faces. So I mean, in some way that there's a good thing, but also at the same time there's some negative connotation there. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell whether these people are walking in their own field or as a community together, or they are migrant workers. So it's kind of it. But it has the environment that they are walking in this lush paddy field, yeah, and it kind of it's amazing to see that even though they walk in this paddy field, their hats look very clean, right? So it's kind of like that asks the question, doing hard work but not showing white person trying to organize them. Yeah, that's a good thing about this image. It is the community, the strong sense of community that is seen here. All right, we'll move to another image here. What do you see in this image? White woman as savior. Yeah, white people are in the right. Yeah, two unhappy little ones. Woman being kind to kids. It showed the selfie there because the children are not necessarily happy, except instead they are nervous or looking to someone who, their parents or to their guardians, and kind of confusion probably. Yeah, the children do not look comfortable. Yes, awkward angle on children, white lady showing affection, but the children not really. We can see in this, and definitely it's not a reciprocal friendship. It's not mutual. And who is this person who hug and kiss me or us? So it's kind of these are the images that oftentimes we see. And of course, we like to take picture and share, especially to see that because we travel and volunteer. But at the same time, it showed the white protagonist or white savior complex issue that we can see here. Yeah, exactly. Did she ask it if she could do that? Exactly, that's the important question. If we take a picture with children or with anyone, consent is the first and foremost, because that is how we would like others to do when they take picture with us. So yeah, let's move to the last image here. What do you see in this last image here? Yeah, looks mutual. Connection, there's connection, everyone's smiling. It's happy playing together, having fun. It's a contrast from the previous one. Man bending over as if to include. Yep, they are on the same level. And also, yeah, the same level with the person who take the picture. And especially that is important, the angle, you know, when you are on the same level, it shows that the person who taking the picture or us who look at the picture, we are engaged more with the image or the people on the image. And the thing is with this interesting also is yeah, is the adult there, or he's a person of color, which is kind of a very rare to see. Sometimes most of the mission photos, oftentimes from white person to people of color in other parts of the world. While this is kind of, it flipped the way we understand mission or who is doing mission here. So it's kind of raise that question and raise that understanding there. Yeah, so let me see here. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is a great way to engage, especially with your church members or with your trip participants, especially as you prepare to travel, as you prepare to, or even after you come back from your mission trips or from your mission engagement, to help participants understand and think through and debrief, because most often time it is through the image like this that it is how we understand mission. If our mission is understand as companionship, then that will be portrayed through the image we share with one another and portray our partnership or our partners or companions. Let me see here. So the thing is, Hunter and I basically what we're trying to say here within the book and here is not necessarily that, of course, not everything it's that we should not do short-term mission trip anymore. We should not do child sponsorship anymore, but rather what we're trying to tell or trying to say is that we need to do it in a more meaningful way. So to close our time here is with this quote from Maya Angelou that say, do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better. With that, I think the thing that we just want to say also before we move to question and answer is that if you want more resources, there the freeingmission.com, there are a lot of resources that we have there, and also a suggestion how to engage with our book, with other mission leaders, and also there's a graduate certificate in missional leadership if you want to grow in your missional leadership, or if you know someone that want to grow in their missional leadership through the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, you can contact Hunter or I at that email, wmi@pts.edu. With that, I will open to a time of question, or I hand over to Nancy, or yeah.
Yeah, I'll field questions here. If you want to use the raise hand feature on the bottom, you can do that if you have a question, or we've got some questions in the book, or I mean, in the chat, sorry. Cheryl?
Yes, I was going to bring us back to a question that had been asked very early on, and the Hunter and Bala touched on this a bit, but it might actually be a good summary for us. What, other than listening carefully, what strategies can help us to be better helpers rather than directors?
Beautiful. Bala will have his take on this, I know. We really dedicated what we heard clearly from the congregational mission leaders in the US was they didn't want professors talking at them. They wanted to get practical insights. They wanted strategies. They wanted better practices. And so we dedicated, chapter 8 is all strategies. It's a specific set of recommendations for ways that congregational mission leaders can form a group, a nucleus of change makers within their congregation that can help them take a step away from colonial assumptions of mission and help lead the congregation towards deeper, more reflectful engagement in God's mission. We do this through a variety of ways that what we kind of Paulo Freire's wisdom that comes to us over the years about how we learn best. It's through that cycle of reflection and action. And so we share, rather than meeting in the mission committee at 7:30 on the first Tuesday night or whatever your schedule is, and we divvy up a diminishing pot of funds to a growing number of organizations. I mean, that's kind of the future that's facing us in many congregations, mission committees. Rather than that, what if we saw ourselves as seeds of God's realm in our congregation, to open the eyes of the congregation to what God has in store for all of us in our congregation through our neighbor. And it may be our neighbor who is different from us. It comes to us from a woman's perspective or from an LGBTQ perspective. It may come to us from a different language group or a refugee community in our own cities, and not to mention our global partners. And we feel that this becomes the motor of congregational vitality and renewal as we open our hearts to what God is doing in our own neighborhoods and in our global neighborhood. So we dedicated that, chapter 8 is one of the larger chapters because it lays out some specific strategies. And I mentioned that kind of forming a group of leaders. You all know what happens when you take a trip somewhere with someone. You come back from that experience and you bonded together because you've entered that space of it's a thin place, right? You're on the road together. It's like a pilgrimage. And social inequities are reduced when we're on the road together. We begin to think in ways of ourselves as part of the same body. And we just think that's a really important concept. So taking a trip together, what if you as a mission committee or the mission leaders of your church took a trip, in quotes, and began to do service once a month together in a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen in your own city? These kinds of activities, and then if you get back together afterwards and reflect together, that's the critical part that's often missing in our mission practice in many U.S. congregations. We'll do an activity, but we don't take time to do the reflection. I think SEDEPCA has been a real thought leader for us among our mission partners. I mean, how many of you have you ever participated in a SEDEPCA activity where you didn't go back and reflect? We do this reflection, this analysis, and it helps us to change gears and move in a more helpful direction in the future. So there's a number of strategies that we use in the book and in the article I wrote for Presbyterian Outlook in February. We talk about the power that you have as a mission leader that is called the power of a question. Merely by raising the question, as you all are, let's say there's a lot of energy in your mission committee to do a vacation Bible school for kids in the neighborhood, many of whom are unchurched, right? And you ask the question, who should be at the table for us to make these kinds of decisions? All of a sudden we hit the brakes. Wow, what if we included some of the parents? What a great idea. Now we're cooking. Suddenly you've changed the direction of a whole group of people merely by asking a thoughtful question. And so we share some of those kinds of questions. And just to step back a bit and say, with all of the mission industries that we critique, we do a hard critique, and I'll say that it is a hard critique of child sponsorship, of orphanages, of meal packaging programs and short-term mission. But with all of those, we do lift up some questions in each of those chapters that would to encourage you to ask these questions of the child sponsorship agency that you're working with. If you're sending them money each month, you have the right to ask these questions. And in fact, you are the primary change agents in all of these mission industries because we are consumers, right? We are consuming these products, and the market is very sensitive to what you and I think about and the questions that we're raising. So we just encourage you to do that. I think it gives power to many mission leaders in ways that we did not expect, right? Most of us feel like, I just have a shrinking budget and increasing needs out in the world, and what am I going to do with this? But in fact, you've got some remarkable power that God has given you to be able to make a difference in the way your people understand God's mission. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, Cheryl.
Bala, do you have any a thought on the same question?
Yeah, I mean, beside what Hunter, definitely beside what Hunter shared, definitely in the sense that I know, because like, this mindset of going, I mean, this is what Hunter oftentimes used, the empty hands, right? Beside, you just go, because oftentimes when we go to any place, we assume that we have all the answer, or we have, for example, if we with cultural competence, we take some training and we assume that I've know about that culture, right? To engage with that culture because I've taken some course or some language class. But oftentimes, when we engage with people, it's always different. So I think it's the one of the main important thing is to always go with an open mind and open hearts and empty ourselves to really be in this humble learn with humility or walk with humility, and especially from cultural humility aspect is to know that we always continue to learn. We never arrive at we never arrive, but we always continue to learn. So I will add to what Hunter already mentioned that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Dory?
Yeah, I wondered, I appreciate all the practical tools that are in the book. I wonder if you can make a suggestion or talk about any experience you might have with using those tools with mutual groups. For example, I'm a mission coworker, and I think it would be important for some of the short-term mission groups that visit my mission partner to not do the reflection themselves, but to reflect on their mission experience with the mission partner, the recipient, quote unquote, recipient of the mission. But it's really hard to find tools that kind of help us do that. They seem to be all targeted towards the kind of the traveler. So I'm wondering what advice you would give.
Yeah, I know, Hunter, probably you have a thought, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is that, Hunter and I kind of like, one of the tools that we have in mind is in the book is to that mutual evaluation, right? But we haven't really, yeah, because like it's a challenging thing to have a mutual evaluation, how you would do mutual evaluation, because because of cultural differences and also because of the power dynamic at play, right? Between, especially if you depend on the resources that come from the US church, how will I give honest feedback to my partners who always we receive the money? So it's kind of that is one of the challenging thing, even in terms of how to have that mutual engagement or mutual evaluation. But I think it start with our willingness to have the partners, I know, shape the way we engage in mission is one way, but at the same time, I think we have to somehow break the cycle of this binary, the giver and receiver aspect that we often have, not only for US American church, but also for our partners who have, because of the colonial impact, have seen or have assumed or have seen as just we just receive from our US church. So I don't know, is there I know, Hunter, you have any thought more on that?
Yeah, and thanks, Dory. I'm a fan of your work. I've been following you on in some of the newsletters, and I'm excited about what you're doing. I think this can be dynamite in a partner relationship. Think about that tool one that we just went through. To hear in small groups, North Americans and Hondurans together, looking at these images, what do you see? I think some of the answers we might hear around the circle will blow us away. I had no idea, we will say. I didn't see that as a power relationship. How did they pick that up? I mean, all the things that'll come to our mind simply because, I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for you, but I have been cocooned in privilege most of my life, and I haven't had to worry about the next meal. And so my vision, these glasses have been warped by that privilege over the years. And so I think if just use tool one as you're on the first day as kind of an exercise, because I do think as we look at these images, suddenly we begin to say, wow, I hadn't considered that. What else might I not have considered in this partner of mine? And so it leads us into a more reflective posture, what Bala has written eloquently about cultural humility as a necessary posture of mission, and even looking back to Jesus' example. Century. So I think the mutual, using the photos, the imagery, how we represent mission, I think is a great first step. I'd also insist on what Bala is saying about the what we call mutual evaluation. We talk, I think it's I can't recall, Bala, it is the tool 5, where we sort of a structure to do evaluation.
Yeah, I think it's 5. I just read it.
Great, thanks, Dory. So tool 5, if you do that together, you'll need to think cross-culturally. And so in the Honduran context, where more people are coming from what we call a high power distance, there's a sense of more hierarchy, and they're more respectful of station in life, right? Which adds order and meaning and some security to their lives. The challenge to that is sometimes folks speak up the hierarchy, and so if you've come in and you're paying for things and there's a lot of money flowing, they may feel that they don't have the right, or they don't feel it's desirable to speak up in a negative way. And so most of our evaluations is like, boy, wasn't that great? We had a great time, end of story, and we move on. It's not a very authentic evaluation. But there are ways when you can work, like in caucuses, where you allow some, Honduran small groups. I'm jumping into context here in Central America, but to allow a group of Hondurans to get together and allow them to say, how was this joint activity that we've spent the last 5 days doing together? Then allows them to shape their narrative. It's probably a more collectivistic culture. I haven't spent more than 5 days of my life in Honduras, but my sense is they're a lot more community oriented than our individualistic orientation. That opens up a space, once that they've had a chance to talk with each other, see what their leaders say, what their people of wisdom, older folks say. It allows them to shape a narrative that they feel empowered to share. They probably won't do that as we evaluate. We do a written form, we do it individually, and we submit it anonymously, right? That's probably not going to be a format, but a conversation with folks where they're allowed to have their pre-caucus and then come together can do some powerful things. Bala and I are working on that right now. In fact, that's our next project, to think about ways that we can lower barriers to an authentic flow of conversation without distorting the ways that people talk through their own cultural background. Yeah, thanks for that, Dory.
Joy? You're muted.
Hi, I'm seeing you from a different place this time, Spokane and not Guatemala. Just a quick comment on what you were just talking about, but it's not why I raised my hand. I was thinking that maybe also having a third person might help kind of mediate that conversation, in that, for example, when we went to Betsy's church, it was the Episcopal minister, but she was Guatemalan, correct? But she spoke English. Here's someone who's not invested in either group. She hasn't worked with either group, so you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings of that group that you just spent a week working with. But someone like that might be able to just facilitate that kind of discussion. But the reason that I did raise my hand is that as some of my friends here know that when the Trump administration started, I started listening to right-wing radio stations because I just didn't understand what was going on. Just as I was listening to it just a little while ago, it was just awful how they were talking about what they've labeled CRT. And one of the things I'm only on page 24 of your book, but one of the things that just hit me in the face was your comment about in 18 something, 14% of the world had been colonized. And then by 1914, it had been 85%. I mean, just if we have a country in many parts or a place in many parts of the country that they won't even talk about slavery in the United States, and people say CRT, you know, that you're just telling little kids they're oppressors, which is not anyway. How do we even start these conversations with people? And more importantly, how do we try to say what you're hearing coming from different people is so untrue? You know, we have to have these discussions. And if we don't understand where these different countries are coming from, where these different people are coming from, then you're going to continue to have people labeled as terrorists or this and that. And how do we get beyond that? I know that's not a 30-second question, but I feel so hopeless lately of how there just seems to be so much hate without having any facts or any information or anything behind it. It's just bald-faced hate for the other.
Joy, thank you for your question from the heart, because I think that's on the minds and hearts of a lot of folks in this circle and across the church. So this is me wondering. I wonder if God has brought us into God's mission so that we can encounter folks who are different from us. We can develop deep and meaningful relationships with them, and those relationships themselves begin to question some of those colonial assumptions that we might make, some of those racist assumptions that many of us make as we get up in the morning and move through our days. What I'm seeing is much of our work at Pittsburgh Seminary in what we call anti-racism training that we do for staff and faculty and students. Much of that is like, I mean, the image for me is we're trying to beat down the front door. And oftentimes we don't get very far. You sense pushback, people are defensive. There's not a very deep level of sharing in those spaces. In contrast, mission, when I have a colleague, Kimberly Gonche, and I developed a course to take students on a mission trip. So we do a 10-day mission trip. And in fact, in January, we're going to SEDEPCA, going to Guatemala with SEDEPCA. And we'll do 15 hours of reflection. We do that 10-day experience and then come back for 15 more hours of reflection. And people, it's like we're stepping in, we're moving through the back door or the kitchen door of mission, and allows us to sit down at the table with folks and speak from the heart. They have experienced, as students at Pittsburgh Seminary encounter structures of control and oppression in Palestine, they come back, and the question of our African-American students was, hey guys, where have you seen these structures before? And many of our white students were like, what are you talking about? And that pushed us into a painful and important and deeply authentic space of conversation, which we had not been in before with each other, Black and white students who'd studied together, you know, in a school environment, an academic environment for a couple of years. But they step into this course and suddenly they're on the road together, right? They're companions in God's mission. And there's a space of shared vulnerability. They begin to ask questions they haven't. And it can be that our global partners, SEDEPCA and many of the groups that SEDEPCA works with, can ask questions that help us to see our own reality with new eyes. So I'm wondering, you know, maybe one of the tools in our church to recognize and begin to address the deeply entrenched assumptions of racism that I get up every morning and have them. That's what shaped me as an American. I'm 64 years old, and that's just been the way that I've been shaped over my life. I'm not ashamed of that, but I know that God will hold me responsible if I don't take actions now to address that. And it's friends at SEDEPCA who are opening my eyes to the ways that our lives are couched in privilege, and they help me to begin to ask some deeper questions that become really important in my own Christian discipleship. So yeah, Joy, thanks for the question. And I hope all of us can begin to think together, and SEDEPCA, I hope, continues to lead us in these conversations about how something as, we think of as just so American as race. Well, because of colonialism, racism, it's at a global level, and it's carried into countries around the world. And so this allows us an opportunity to have some deeper conversations among us. Thanks.
We have to close our time for questions, but I'm thinking if you do still have a question, will you put it in the chat? Whoever you are, put your question in the chat, and perhaps Bala or Hunter could respond to the question in the chat just in our remaining minutes, so we at least get some of these questions answered. There was a question I know about mission, like is there a different word that we could use when we are inviting people to participate in a trip, for instance? So that's a good question for the chat. But I'm going to turn it over to Esvin right now.
Thank you so much, Hunter and Bala, for this book, for this time, for your wisdom, for your pastoral spirit, and for this presentation. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Esvin Sitting. I am a facilitator and logistics coordinator for the Intercultural Encounters program. And one of the things I love about my job is being there to walk along with people, to process the things that we have seen and learn while we travel in Guatemala. Right now, we're going to do some of that processing using the chat feature. So we would like you to respond to this question. What have you heard today that challenges, intrigues, or encourages you? Then I will read some of those responses out loud. And I know it might, okay, Cheryl, it's challenging, of course. Sometimes it might take more than a minute or two to process what we have just experienced right now. Yeah, meaningful learning about the impact of photography in the context of mission. Okay, the Maya Angelou quote, when you know better, do better. It's nice to have a guide that it's Bala and Hunter's book to help answer questions and avoid colonialistic attitude. I love the thought that Dora raised about trying to do some mutual perfection with partners. Partners visited, and I think that in some cases it could be on Zoom. Yeah, I agree with Joy, and I'm equally fearful about future in our country and how divide will affect new generations here and elsewhere. I know that I need to consider all the volunteer work and be sure that it's not one-sided. I'm a white citizen, stepping into racism and benefiting from racist colonial system. I did not feel guilty about this, but God calls me to work to transform myself and to work to transform myself and the world. So I must be conscious of this. If I refuse to do that work, then I should feel guilty. Do what you can until you know better than to better the code. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. What have been some of your thoughts during this presentation. I personally, we have a lot to reflect and to be conscious, and of course, continue in that road of transformation. Thank you. Thank you for all your comments. We will, we really appreciate you taking that time to share from your heart.
Thank you, Esvin. Thank you for these wonderful responses. God is transforming us as we learn together. My name is Nancy Carrera, and I am the coordinator for the Intercultural Encounters at CEDEPCA. Thank you all for coming and for caring about being a part of God's mission in the world in a way that honors the dignity and capacity of all people. That matters to us in Guatemala, where there has been a painful history of colonialism that continues to influence our quality of life. Correcting misconceptions and working toward transformation is a shared work. It cannot be done alone. I really want to thank Hermano Hunter Farrell, a longtime friend and mission partner of CEDEPCA, and his co-author Bala Kelly. You have inspired us and challenged us to think critically about our work. We trust that your work will have far-reaching effects and are so grateful that you have taken the time to share with us today. On behalf of Judith Castañeda, the General Coordinator, and the CEDEPCA staff, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And now I just want to invite all of you participants tonight to be a part of what CEDEPCA is doing to change the face of mission and work toward God's justice everywhere. I invite you to pray for us and for our ministry. These are challenging times, especially as we face this phase of the pandemic. So keep us in your prayers. Second, bring a group to Guatemala. We are continuing to talk with groups, and we have a lot of new groups in the coming year, but we love being a part of this work of forming intercultural relationships, and we see it as a really important part of bringing justice in the world, as Hunter was talking about, just getting people out of their normal routine so that they can even reflect on their life back home. So bring a group to Guatemala. And finally, donate to our programs if you are able. We have a link how to donate in the chat, and even a small amount is so appreciated. We always feel so upheld and encouraged at CEDEPCA when we receive your donations. So if you feel so moved, you can go right to our donation page by clicking on that link in the chat. And tonight, I might suggest that you direct your donation specifically to our Intercultural Encounters program, because we seek justice by designing experiences of encounter, reflection, dialogue, and mutual service, which is what we were talking about tonight. So now we've come to the end of our time together. I want to thank you for coming and give you this blessing. May your learning continue. May your involvement in God's mission in the world deepen, and may your love for God, for your neighbor, and for yourself expand by the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. We will keep this space open for another 5 minutes for an optional time of fellowship, but for those of you who need to go, gracias y adios. And thanks again, everybody. It's been awesome. Thanks especially to Hunter and Bala.